everyone, and welcome back to the next part of the Halloween special. So in this tutorial I wanted to go through doing some quick and easy bases that would suit some death models. I've called them dusty bases, and that's because I like to use some pigments. I just find they're a nice, quick and easy way to create a natural looking base. So as you can see, this model's almost completed in terms of painting. So the base is basically all that's left to do. Now, I want to show a nice product for doing quick and easy bases. And it is quite similar to the Games Workshop stuff out there. But it's this one here by Vallejo, Earth Texture. I find it's a really nice fine grain that I find just applies a lot easier than the Citadel ones. So it's really good for doing lots of bases, especially for tabletop stuff, as we've been looking at with the ghoul so far. So quite similar to the Games Workshop stuff. You just want to get some on your brush or whatever you're using. This is obviously an old brush that I don't use for painting anymore. Obviously this mix has the sand in it, but it has some sort of adhesive in it, so you don't want to be using any nice brushes because they're just going to get ruined. So what I like to do, I mean, this is kind of quite self-explanatory, but I like to kind of lay it out. And then once it's laid out, I kind of give it a bit of texture. And I'll show you once I've done that. Sometimes if you're just kind of quickly kind of brushing it on, there's a tendency for it to kind of flatten out and just look a bit too much like it's just been kind of laid on there. Whereas you want to kind of, I feel, give it a bit of texture afterwards. The nice thing about this one, there's a whole range of different textures and things that you can get, but I like this one because it's quite a neutral sort of colour for the paint that they use in it. So it's easy to go over it. It's easy to kind of do different kinds of washes over it to change the colour of the base, and it's just it's an easy base to work on. So I've laid it all out. As you can see, there are some kind of areas where it's just looking kind of flat. So I like to kind of just kind of randomly dab on there. Let's give it a bit of variation. Not that important, but I just find it can sometimes help to get rid of those areas that are kind of really noticeable as brush strokes, which you don't want because they don't look very natural. They kind of ruin the effect. So yeah, that's that. And now the obvious thing to do is to let that dry. It would take a few hours at least, but obviously overnight is best for that kind of thing. So yeah, we'll just wait for that to dry and we'll move on to the next step. Alright, here's one that I prepared earlier. for the purposes of filming, I did this one up earlier prior to painting the ghoul, just because it takes a while to dry and I want to get this filmed. So I've got that texture laid out and that is dry. The skull in the middle there. I've just gone for some simple elements. This rock is just black at the moment, so I'm going to just dry brush that with a bit of... I don't want to go with the kind of simple greys, so I've gone with dark Reaper, just for a bit of an interesting look. So it's not too plain looking, but also might look nice against the colours going on with the ghoul skin. Obviously this is just a random base that I'm making up just for the purposes of the video, but it might end up with a ghoul on it. Not the ghoul that I'm painting though. So just a bit of dark Reaper on there, and I'm actually going to use some Thunderhawk now, Thunderhawk blue. And then actually going to introduce a bit of Karak stone just for the final dry brush. Very light dry brushing, just so adding that Karak stone, instead of going with another lighter blue hue of paint, just kind of helps to dull it down a little bit so the blue isn't too overpowering. Normally I would use a bigger brush for dry brushing, but this is just what I had. So yeah, it just gives it a nice look rather than just being a plain old grey rock. Alright, so as I mentioned earlier with laying out this texture paint, it's a nice colour to work on top of because it's quite a neutral sort of look. So what I'm actually going to go with is 1 part wildwood with 1 part water and then 1 part Lamian medium. And the reason for the Lamian medium is because it is a matte medium. It helps to dull things out a bit and just make them look a bit more natural and not too glossy. So I'm just going to apply that now. All over. Just wait for that to dry before moving on to the next step. Alright, so once that has dried, the next thing that I like to do is start to introduce some pigment powders. So there's a number of different brands on the market. I've always just used the Vallejo ones. The colour that I'm going for is this one, Natural Umber, which I think will complement the brown quite nicely, what we've already done. So what I do is I take quite a large brush, start to mix it. I like to normally mix this with an alcohol, but when using alcohol you need to gloss varnish the model to coat it, to protect it. Otherwise the alcohol can eat away at the paint, and we don't really want that. So for the purposes of this exercise I'm just using water, and in most instances this is fine anyway. If you handle the model a lot it could rub off, but the areas that we're applying it to aren't areas that are going to get that much handling anyway, even from a gaming perspective. So I'll just mix that with some water, not kind of too pedantic on the ratio, just getting a kind of a consistency that looks a lot like probably a mix between a contrast paint and a wash, really. And then just start applying that on. So I'm basically kind of covering this. I'm going to go over the skull. It's going to give the skull a nice dusty sort of look. Obviously going over all of the sand. And then with the rock I'm just going to sort of lightly touch it in the lower areas. Just apply some of it there. Then what I'm going to do is get rid of that brush. I'm going to take a damp brush and just start to kind of push some of it, kind of doing kind of a pseudo glaze in a sense, pushing it down towards the base. And kind of softening off any of those chunky areas of where the pigment sat. So yeah, and so when that dries, it'll start to, it looks lighter when it dries, quite similar to how it looks there. Once the water has evaporated, it leaves the pigment powder behind, and as you'll see, it leaves this nice dusty sort of look. So yeah, we'll move on to the next step after that. Alright, so I also applied some to the base of the model as well, and so that has dried, and that's kind of the look that you get. You may have noticed that I use a lighter pigment over a dark base. This is an approach I always like to take because I just like the way that it shows off that kind of dusty look with the lighter colour sitting under the darker sand. It just kind of makes it pop a bit, and just kind of I feel looks a bit more natural. So the last thing that I want to do is to kind of get the ghoul looking like he's integrating with the base a bit. So I'm just going to take some of that and I'm going to thin it down a little bit more, and essentially just glazing it onto his feet. And then as that dries, it'll also give that dusty look on his feet and those lower parts of his leg. It'll just help to look like he's integrating with his environment a little bit. This gives it a bit more of a realistic, natural kind of look. Yeah. You can also apply a little bit to those hairy sort of bits, them a dusty sort of look. Like they've been sort of catching dirt and stuff. Nice on the skull a little bit as well. So yeah, once that dries, I'll come back and show you and you'll start to see that effect. Alright, so there you go. It is quite subtle, but you don't want it to kind of stand out too much, otherwise it can look a little bit unnatural. We just want it to be kind of a light, dusty kind of look on his feet. Yeah, so that's a nice little look to go for to get the model to sort of look like it's part of its environment a little bit more. So yeah, there was also that one that I did that started to almost completely dry. So you can see, yeah, it's got that nice dusty sort of look. Quite simple for doing on a large amount of models as well, which is perfect for these guys. If you're doing this for a more of a tabletop sort of look. So yeah, so that concludes this tutorial, and I hope it's helped out. Just to do bases in a different kind of way to the usual ones that you see out there. So yeah, thank you very much.